Over the past year, headlines have been buzzing with talks of a global shift away from the US dollar. China has struck trade deals with Saudi Arabia, Brazil, and others to settle trade in their own currencies. Russia has been actively promoting alternatives to the US dollar in response to sanctions, and the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are exploring various ways to reduce their reliance on the greenback, including the possibility of issuing their own currency. These moves signal a growing push towards what's often been dubbed de-dollarization. But why are countries turning away from the US dollar now after decades of dominance? What does this mean for the global economy, and what would a world less reliant on the US dollar look like? Hey everyone, and welcome back to Global Insights, where we explore how insights in political science, international relations, and political economy can help us make sense of current events. I'm Noah Zerbe. I'm a professor of political science at California State Polytechnic University Humboldt, and today we're exploring the idea of de-dollarization. For decades, the US dollar has been the dominant currency in global trade and finance, and was the primary currency used from everything from oil transactions to foreign reserves. The dominance of the dollar was established at the 1944 Bretton Woods Conference, which essentially established a fixed exchange rate system with the US dollar pegged to gold and other major international currencies tied to the US dollar. Although this system collapsed in the early 1970s, the dollar nevertheless retained its central role in the global economy, serving as the primary currency for global trade, foreign reserves, and debt and investment. Many key commodities, like oil via the petrodollar system, were priced and traded in gold. If you're interested in learning more about the petrodollar system, I'll link to my video on that topic in the notes below. But as recently as 2024, the dollar was used in more than half of all foreign trade invoices globally, nearly twice as much as the next closest currency, the euro. Central banks around the world also traditionally held a significant portion of their reserves in US dollar-denominated assets, most often treasury bills. These reserves were used to help manage the forex value of their own currencies and to weather economic shocks. Today, around 60% of global foreign currency reserves are held in US dollars, nearly 3 times the value of the euro, the second most widely held reserve currency. Many countries and corporations issue debt denominated in dollars, and global investors often seek out US Treasury bonds as a safe haven asset, as historically the dollar was viewed by creditors as a hedge against foreign exchange risk. Indeed, nearly 2/3 of world debt is denominated in US dollars. The global dominance of the dollar historically conferred on the United States several distinct advantages, a phenomenon described by French Finance Minister Valéry Giscard d'Estaing in the 1960s as the U.S.'s exorbitant privilege. This exorbitant privilege meant that the United States could borrow money internationally at lower interest rates since its debt was denominated in its own currency. This also reduced the cost of servicing that debt and funded U.S. domestic policies. It also meant that, unlike other currencies, the United States was able to sustain large trade deficits without corresponding devaluation of its currency. This is because demand for dollars globally offset downward pressure on its value. The dollar's dominance also gave the United States considerable geopolitical power, as it could use control of the dollar as a way to effectively impose sanctions by restricting access to dollar-based transactions. Finally, the United States also benefited from seigniorage, the profit made by issuing a currency. In simple terms, currency is usually worth more than the cost of making it. That is, there's a difference between the cost of producing currency and its face value. According to the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, it costs the U.S. government about 8.5 cents to produce a $100 bill, but that bill is worth $100. Thus, every $100 bill yields a seigniorage of $99.61 for the U.S. government. The world's reliance on dollars meant that other countries essentially financed U.S. spending by holding dollars. As of 2023, there were about 18.9 billion $100 bills in circulation, and about 80% of those were held outside of the United States, generating more than $1.88 trillion in seigniorage. But recently we've seen countries like China, Russia, and even Brazil pushing to reduce their reliance on the US dollar in international transactions. This movement, known as de-dollarization, is gaining momentum. De-dollarization refers to the process where countries, institutions, or global markets reduce their reliance on the US dollar for international trade, financial transactions, and as a reserve currency. This shift involves using alternative currencies like the Chinese renminbi, the euro, or local currencies, or even specie like gold or silver, instead of US dollars for trade settlements, reserves, and cross-border investment. And we can see this process of de-dollarization in action if we look at the composition of global reserve currencies held over time. While the US dollar is still the primary reserve currency, it's actually at a relatively historical low point. According to data from the International Monetary Fund, over the past 25 years, the US dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves fell from nearly 3/4 to about 60% in recent years. This gradual move away from the US dollar, which has accelerated in recent years, has been driven by a variety of factors. For US rivals like Russia, Iran, Venezuela, or others, there are geopolitical concerns. The United States frequently uses its control over the global financial system to impose sanctions on other countries. These sanctions restrict access to dollar-based systems like the SWIFT network, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, creating vulnerabilities for targeted nations. To counter this, sanctioned countries seek to reduce their reliance on the dollar in order to avoid the impact of U.S. economic measures. They're diversifying their currency reserves and developing alternatives to U.S.-centered financial systems. And even countries not subject to U.S. sanctions are often concerned with the heavy impact that dependence on the dollar could have on them. Countries around the world are exposed to and impacted by U.S. monetary policy changes, like changes in interest rates by the Federal Reserve, and these changes can yield impacts like currency volatility, inflation, and economic instability in other countries. By diversifying away from the dollar, countries aim to gain greater control over their own domestic economies and reduce external financial risk. De-dollarization also provides an avenue for other major economies like the BRICS to challenge the unipolar dominance of the U.S. From this perspective, de-dollarization is part of a broader strategy to establish a multipolar financial system that better reflects the growing economic influence of these countries. And finally, using the U.S. dollar in trade settlements can introduce additional costs like currency conversion or exposure to dollar exchange rate fluctuations. Bilateral or multilateral systems in local currencies can lower these costs. Despite the push for de-dollarization, there are some significant roadblocks in reducing the dollar's dominance. Indeed, while de-dollarization is gaining momentum, it's important to remember that the dollar's dominance is not going to disappear overnight. The movement towards de-dollarization is not necessarily about replacing the US dollar entirely, but often rather about reducing its dominance in order to create a more diversified and multipolar financial system, one in which the US dollar is one of several major international currencies, each of which plays an important role in managing the global economy. And while the forces driving de-dollarization are significant, challenges to the US dollar dominance face several obstacles. First, the dollar benefits from both network effects and path dependency. It's deeply embedded in global trade, finance, and investment systems, and its liquidity and stability make it difficult to replace. In simple terms, network effects refer to the phenomenon where a product or service becomes more valuable as more people use it. The more countries, institutions, and individuals that use the US dollar for trade, investment, and reserves, the more beneficial and easier it becomes for others to do the exact same thing. The widespread adoption ensures high liquidity, meaning it's easy to exchange dollars for other currencies or for goods. In other words, global trade markets rely on the US dollar because most of the participants in the system do, reducing transaction costs and risks to everyone when they're on the same currency standard. Switching to another currency would require a significant number of participants to adopt the new standard simultaneously, which can be difficult to coordinate. This effect is reinforced by path dependency, which refers to how decisions or patterns established in the past strongly influence the present and future, even if alternatives might be more efficient or desirable now. Historically, the US dollar became the dominant currency after the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, and that continued even after the end of the gold standard in the 1970s. But once global institutions, banks, and trade systems were built around the dollar, it generated significant inertia. Today, breaking away from that dollar system is challenging because so much of the global financial architecture, like the payment system, the SWIFT networks, financial contracts, reserves, and so on, is dominated in dollars. Even if alternatives like the euro or the renminbi exist, the complexity of transitioning from established systems makes change slow and difficult. This network effect explains why countries and corporations continue to rely on the dollar, even as some push for alternatives. The dollar's dominance essentially creates a feedback loop. The more it's used, the more beneficial it becomes. Path dependency, on the other hand, highlights why de-dollarization is not simply a matter of switching currencies, but rather involves overcoming deeply entrenched systems and habits. Further, despite progress, other currencies are sometimes perceived, rightly or wrongly, as lacking the same level of trust, stability, and global acceptance as the dollar. Remember that currencies serve both as a store of value and as a medium of exchange. While the euro, renminbi, yen, and others may serve these functions in some capacity, none have, at least so far, been able to overcome the dominance of the dollar. The size and depth of the U.S. financial markets also provides some opportunities for investment, making the dollar attractive as a reserve currency. And while China, Russia, and others have set up alternative financial markets, to date at least, none have been able to displace the U.S.-centered system. So, what does the future hold? While de-dollarization is unlikely to completely dethrone the U.S. dollar in the near term, it could lead to a more fragmented, multipolar global financial system. This might include regional currency blocks and greater use of digital currencies. For investors and policymakers, this shift poses both challenges and opportunities. For example, a diversified currency system could reduce the risk associated with reliance on any single currency. But on the flip side, it could also complicate global trade and increase transaction costs. De-dollarization isn't just an economic trend. It's a reflection of shifting power dynamics in international relations. It challenges us to think about how global financial systems evolve and what a post-hegemonic world might look like. But what do you think? Is de-dollarization a necessary step towards a fairer global economy? Or does it risk destabilizing the system we already have? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Thanks for tuning in to Global Insights. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future episodes. Until next time, I'm Noah Zerbe, helping you make sense of global politics and economics, one concept at a time.